43 people bought tickets. That is the reported paying attendance at a wheelchair basketball match during the 2025 Invictus Games in Vancouver. Harry's flagship charitable project, the one he points to when asked what he built after leaving the monarchy, the event whose mission is to honor wounded veterans and demonstrate what they can still achieve. 43 people paid to be in that room. According to investigative biographer Tom Bower, approximately 100 additional people were brought in by organizers and positioned around Harry and Meghan for photographs, bodies placed to fill the camera frame that was going to exist regardless of whether any audience had shown up. Let that image settle properly before we move forward. A venue designed for thousands, a sport built around courage and sacrifice. Athletes who gave parts of their bodies in service to their countries, who competed on that court despite everything those injuries had cost them, and 43 paying spectators surrounded by 100 manufactured ones. The athletes were real. The injuries they carried onto that court were real. The suffering that produced those athletes, the accidents, the conflicts, the service that changed those lives permanently, was absolutely real. The crowd around them was a production decision made by an organization that needed the photographs to look a certain way regardless of what the actual attendance was. Tonight we are going through the documented chain of events that produced that image. Not as a collection of gossip items or a tabloid summary, but as a sequence with dates, names, formal complaints, and corporate decisions that each individually tell a story and that collectively connect into something with a shape and a logic. We are going through the shield that kept negative coverage suppressed and what happened the moment it fell. The formal workplace complaint filed by Meghan's own communications secretary in 2018 that asked in writing whether the rules even applied to her, the Beckham photograph ban that preceded the friendship's destruction, the specific word Bill Simmons used on record about Spotify, and the story he says he still has not told, the one involving a specific Zoom call with Harry that Simmons considers one of the best stories he has. By the end of this, you will understand the pattern not as a series of unfortunate coincidences, but as a documented operating method with a consistent outcome. Let's start with Tom Bower, because his 2026 investigation is the frame for this story, and the reaction to it tells you more than the book itself. Bower is not a royal gossip columnist recycling anonymous tips and blind items. He is the journalist who exposed Robert Maxwell's pension fraud before any mainstream publication was willing to run it, who built the sourcing, documented the evidence, and published it while Maxwell was still alive and still threatening journalists with libel suits. He dismantled Gordon Brown's political mythology with sourced documentation while Brown was still serving as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. His standard, which he has stated explicitly, is that he has very good lawyers, and more importantly, he makes sure that what he writes is true. His 2022 Sussex investigation drew on 80 separate sources. 80 individual people willing to speak on or off the record to a biographer with a documented reputation for thoroughness. When his 2026 follow-up landed, the Sussex response was a formal public statement describing his work as deranged conspiracy. Think carefully about that phrase as a denial. A real denial says, that date is incorrect. A real denial says, that document does not exist. A real denial identifies a specific factual error and corrects it on the record. What deranged conspiracy does is characterize tone rather than contest fact. It says the person writing is not credible, without engaging with a single specific claim. And by issuing a formal public statement, the Sussex team identified exactly which claims they considered dangerous. Silence lets a news cycle die in a week. A formal response is a signal flare. Bower himself noted the irony. Their public response pushed the book to #1 on Amazon. They became the marketing operation for the investigation they wanted to discredit. Now let's talk about the Shield, because it is the structural explanation for the timing of almost every story in this file. In April 2023, Meghan signed with William Morris Endeavor, not just a talent agency, but the most powerful talent representation firm in Hollywood. WME is run by Ari Emanuel, the man who personally represents Dwayne Johnson, Mark Wahlberg, and this connection carries specific weight given the Sussex story, Oprah Winfrey. Signing with William Morris Endeavor is not like hiring a publicist or a PR company. It is acquiring a private army with institutional reach throughout the entertainment and media landscape. Multiple industry insiders have been explicit about what WME's primary function for Meghan actually was intended to be. It was not about booking film roles or negotiating brand deals in the ordinary talent representation sense. The primary function was press suppression, acting as a shield. When you have Ari Emanuel in your corner, publications reconsider running critical stories. Editors make phone calls they would not otherwise make. The cost of publishing something negative increases because the subject is represented by someone who controls access to a very significant portion of the talent that the entertainment and media industries depend on. The shield was the point. Here is what happened next, and the dates matter more than the details. Around Thanksgiving 2023, Meghan reportedly threw what sources describe as a fit over what she perceived as insufficient attention from the agency during the holiday period. The expectation that a talent representation firm should be actively working on her behalf through a major American holiday weekend. She demanded a meeting in January 2024. She arrived at that meeting expecting what sources describe as decks and plans. Formal strategic presentations, the kind of deliverables you would expect from a brand consultancy or a management company, not from a talent agency whose function is representation and deal-making. According to multiple independent industry sources, what followed was that Ari Emanuel was finished with her. A second source, someone with direct knowledge of the agency's internal operations, stated plainly that WME was definitively not working on Meghan's personal business going forward. Here is the part that carries the most weight. Both sides publicly maintained the fiction that the relationship was intact well into 2026. She was listed as a client on the agency's roster. No departure was ever announced. No statement from either side acknowledged any change. But behind that public facade, no active deals were being pursued on her behalf. No meaningful meetings had taken place since January 2024. She was represented in name only. The public appearance of the most powerful agency relationship in Hollywood sustained, while the actual substance of it had already gone. One Hollywood insider connected every story that followed with a single precise observation. There is no way the Variety piece about her tensions with Netflix would have been published if William Morris Endeavor was still actively managing Meghan's press relationships and making calls on her behalf. The shield fell in January 2024. Every negative story that followed, the Netflix tensions, the brand failures, the wave of staff departures, the commercial collapse narrative, ran in the unprotected window that opened when the representation effectively ended. That is not coincidence. That is cause and effect with a documented timestamp. And it means that the entire period of public assurances from the Sussex camp, every spokesperson quote about exciting projects in development and strategic momentum, was issued during a window when the person being described had no active agency, no deals in motion, and no professional shield. If Palace Insider is giving you the full documented picture on this story, the shield, the complaint, the Beckham template, the Simmons verdict, the like button costs nothing and it keeps this channel going. Now, let's talk about Jason Knauf, because the document he filed in October 2018 is the single most institutionally significant piece of evidence in the Sussex story, and most coverage either glosses over the specifics or softens the language to the point where the actual weight of what he wrote is lost. Knauf was Meghan's own communications secretary, not a journalist operating on rumor, not a critic with a prior agenda, not an anonymous source with an unverifiable account. He was the man Prince Harry personally asked to help Meghan draft the private letter to her estranged father, Thomas Markle, one of the most sensitive personal communications of that period. He was a trusted insider by every available measure, chosen for precisely that role because of his proximity and his judgment. 2 months after helping draft that letter, he sent a formal email to Simon Case, who was at the time private secretary to Prince William, and he copied the Buckingham Palace Human Resources Department directly. In that email, in his own words, on the record, he wrote that he was very concerned that the Duchess had been able to bully 2 personal assistants out of the household in the past year. He wrote that she seemed intent on always having someone in her sights. He described her as bullying a specific staff member and actively seeking to undermine that person's confidence. He referenced multiple reports from colleagues who had witnessed what he described as unacceptable behavior. These were not secondhand accounts or general impressions. They were specific reported incidents from named witnesses. Then he wrote the sentence that stopped people cold when it eventually became public. He questioned whether the household policy on bullying and harassment applies to principals, not whether specific incidents constituted bullying under the existing policy, whether the policy applied at all to the person being accused. He was not simply reporting specific incidents and asking for them to be addressed. He was asking, in writing, to the Human Resources Department of the most formal institution in Britain, whether the rules that govern workplace conduct in that institution even apply to the person he worked for. That is a question from someone who already knows the answer is unclear, and who is documenting that clarity problem in writing because the situation has become institutionally untenable. That is what an HR filing looks like when someone knows it may need to stand up in a formal process later. Meghan's official response, delivered 3 years after the complaint was filed through a spokesperson, was, "The Duchess is saddened by this latest attack on her character, particularly as someone who has been the target of bullying herself." 3 years of silence. Then this. A formal HR complaint from her own trusted communications secretary, filed with the palace HR department, and citing specific incidents and specific witnesses, was reframed in a single sentence as an attack from a bullying victim. The accuser became the accused. The man who filed the complaint became the latest person attacking her character. The documented question about whether the rules applied became evidence that she was being targeted. Harry reportedly asked Knauf not to pursue the complaint. Knauf resigned approximately 1 month later and went directly to work for Prince William. Buckingham Palace's internal investigation findings were never released and in all probability never will be. But the trajectory of the man who filed the complaint tells you everything about how seriously the institution took what he reported. Subscribe to Palace Insider so you never miss what we cover next, and drop your take in the comments below. Do you think the Knauf complaint was ever going to be addressed seriously given who it was about? Now let's talk about the Beckhams, because the Beckham story is not a footnote. It is the template for every relationship in this file. David Beckham and Harry first connected in 2012. By 2018, the friendship was genuine and multi-year. The Beckhams attended the royal wedding. Victoria personally helped with the interior decoration of Frogmore Cottage. This was not a celebrity acquaintanceship. This was a close personal friendship between two of the most recognizable families on the planet. Then, at the 2018 Invictus Games, Meghan issued a directive. Photographs of Harry standing with David Beckham were forbidden. No images of the two men together were to be distributed. Bower's reporting includes the reasoning. She did not want any competition for media attention from Beckham, and especially not from his wife. She invited them to the wedding, accepted Victoria's help decorating their home, and then, the instant David Beckham's face next to Harry's might redirect even a single camera angle, that was the line. Then came the accusation. Meghan reportedly contacted Beckham in a tense phone call and accused Victoria of leaking stories to the British press. Royal correspondent Kinsey Schofield confirmed what actually happened. It was a salon receptionist, not Victoria. The accusation was demonstrably, provably wrong. But by the time the truth was clear, the friendship was gone. Where does Beckham stand today? He has said publicly and explicitly that whenever the Prince of Wales sends him a message asking him to do something, the answer is always yes. He said it voluntarily in a public interview without being prompted to comment on the Sussex friendship. That is not neutrality, and it is not a carefully neutral non-answer designed to avoid controversy. That is a man who experienced something specific, made a calculation about what it meant for him personally and professionally, and chose a side in the most visible possible way. He chose to make it public. He chose the word always. The man who was accused of leaking stories that turned out to trace back to a receptionist decided to make his current loyalties as clearly visible as the original accusation had been damaging. The template is visible in the sequence. Invite someone in, accept their generosity, use their social capital, and the moment their presence threatens to compete with yours for even a fraction of public attention, remove them. If they resist removal, accuse them of something damaging enough to justify the removal. If the accusation turns out to be wrong, never correct it publicly, because by then, the relationship is already over and the narrative has moved far enough forward that a correction would cost more than the original accusation did. Now the contracts, because corporate money does not operate on emotion. Spotify. A reported $20 million deal. What was delivered across the contract's entire life? 13 episodes of one series called Archetypes and one standalone holiday special. For context on what a $20 million podcast deal is supposed to generate: consistent output, audience growth, commercial integration, and a documented record of delivery that justifies the investment. What Spotify received was 13 episodes and silence over 3 years. On June 16, 2023, the same day the deal officially ended, Bill Simmons went on his own podcast and said what he said. Simmons was the head of podcast innovation and monetization at Spotify. He built and sold The Ringer to Spotify for $196 million. That is not a lucky outcome. That is a man who understands content economics with specificity and depth. He evaluates content businesses the way a surgeon evaluates anatomy. He is not a royal commentator or a tabloid personality. He is a man who signed a $20 million check. watched what happened, and then chose his words on the record at full volume. His verdict, delivered on the record, on a podcast that the entire content industry follows, in a single word that he did not qualify or contextualize or soften: grifters. Then he said something that has been sitting in this narrative ever since, like an unanswered question. He said he has a story, a specific story from a specific Zoom call with Harry, a specific pitch Harry made, a specific moment that Simmons considers one of the best stories he possesses. He said he needs to get drunk one night before he tells it. He still has not told it. That story exists somewhere, documented in at least one person's memory. Whatever Harry said on that call, whatever he pitched, whatever it revealed about how the Sussex operation understood these deals and what they believed they were offering in exchange for $20 million. Simmons considers it the defining story and is choosing very carefully when to deploy it. That call, and whatever happened on it, is the missing center of this entire pattern. Netflix followed an arc so similar to Spotify that if you laid the two timelines beside each other, you would think someone had copied the homework. Reported deal: $100 million. Initial documentary topped the platform's charts, but topped them because it contained direct attacks on the British royal family, because the institutional crisis narrative was the content that audiences came for. That was the commercial product. Not the storytelling quality, not the production craft, not the personal story. The controversy about the monarchy, the institutional access, the royal titles providing context and weight to every accusation made. Follow-up projects generated no comparable viewership. Netflix invested as an equity partner in the lifestyle brand. Netflix then withdrew from the brand entirely. The overall deal was downgraded from a major production arrangement to a first-look deal in summer 2025 and expired without renewal in July 2025. 2 seasons of a lifestyle show aired. No third season announced. The commercial premise, that the combined Sussex brand could generate sustained Netflix-scale audience interest independent of the royal crisis narrative, was tested, and the numbers produced the answer. The staff departures tell the same story in human terms, and the accumulation is the point. 18 senior departures since 2018. That is not normal startup churn. Industry professionals in adjacent fields recognize that number immediately and talk about it behind closed doors. Chief of Staff Josh Kettler resigned after 3 months in 2024. 3 months. His stated reason was that there were aspects of the position he was not comfortable with. The industry standard tenure for a chief of staff role, a position that typically involves significant institutional knowledge and a long learning curve before becoming fully effective, is 3 to 5 years. 3 months is not a career move. 3 months is not a mismatch of expectations. 3 months is someone assessing a situation at close range and concluding they need to leave before they become part of it. Then, the end of 2025. Chief Communications Officer Meredith Maines resigned on December 26th, the day after Christmas. Executive Director of the Archewell Foundation, James Holt, resigned on December 29th, 3 days apart. 2 of the most senior people in the Sussex communications and organizational structure walking out within 72 hours of each other at the end of the calendar year, with no coordinated public announcement and no explanation offered by either side. Royal commentator Helena Chard described Maines as a highly respected professional who would without question be protecting her own reputation. She then made the observation that connects every professional departure in this entire file. A communications strategy only works if all parties adhere to the plan. Not that the strategy was wrong. Not that the messaging was poorly conceived. She was saying that the person whose brand was being managed was overriding the people hired to manage it, making unilateral decisions that contradicted the agreed-upon approach, having the last word on communications choices that the professional team had argued against, and leaving those professionals with their names attached to outcomes they had advised against. Former Palace staff coined the Sussex Survivors Club years before the commercial world arrived at the same conclusion. Half-jokingly, they said. Half. That name was not invented by tabloid headline writers. It was invented by the people who worked closest and experienced it directly. The trademark failure completes the commercial picture and is the detail that most clearly illustrates the gap between the professional presentation of the Sussex operation and what was actually happening inside it. American Riviera Orchard was rejected by the United States Patent and Trademark Office in September 2024. The reason cited: the name is a geographic descriptor, and U.S. trademark law does not permit the registration of geographic names as protected brand identifiers. The entire lifestyle operation, jams, teas, honey, candles, flower sprinkles, had been built on a brand name that trademark law would never protect. Someone either failed to run a basic trademark search before committing to the name, or ran the search, received the answer, and proceeded anyway. The February 2025 rebrand to As Ever was not a creative evolution or a strategic brand refresh. It was a legal emergency dressed in the language of creative reinvention. Every corporation in this story followed the same arc: enthusiasm at the start, proximity in the middle, and a quiet, carefully managed exit at the end. The Beckhams, Spotify, Netflix, William Morris Endeavor, 18 senior staff members, the trademark office. The pattern is so mechanically consistent and repeats across such different types of relationships: personal friendships, corporate deals, professional hires, institutional filings, that at a certain point you stop asking what went wrong with each individual case and start asking what the common denominator is that connects all of them. The answer is sitting in the public record, documented by the people who were closest to the machine, confirmed by the corporations that wrote the largest checks and then quietly did not renew them, and summarized most efficiently by a man who said one word on a podcast in June 2023 and then mentioned a story he still has not told. What do you think was in that Zoom call? And when Simmons eventually tells the story, do you think it will genuinely surprise anyone who has been paying attention closely, or will it simply confirm in specific detail what 43 empty seats in Vancouver already communicated in general terms? Drop your honest take in the comments below. Subscribe to Palace Insider so you never miss what we cover next. The like button keeps this channel doing this kind of documented analysis in full rather than the summary version. See you for the next one. The story keeps producing new material.